So, in the previous video, we've gone over the entire application process for your startup visa in Japan. How to go from absolute zero to actually having the visa in your hand and being in Japan working to create your own successful business from scratch. And so if you haven't watched it yet, I strongly recommend you do so before we continue. Because if you don't have all the necessary information, you could end up making some very costly mistakes. And so with that out of the way, today in part 3 of this series, we'll be covering some of the main benefits, challenges, and important things to keep in mind about your startup visa in Japan. So let's get started. Now, first of all, one of the main points of the visa is that it is currently, as I've mentioned before, not available in the entire country. And Japan being such a vast country with different rules and regulations and laws depending on the prefecture, you'll find that depending on where you apply, you're actually going to be asked to supply different documents. Now, as I've explained in part 2, there's always going to be a list of the main documents that you're going to need. But other than that, there are some additional documents that can vary depending on where you apply. So if you'd like to learn more about the specific requirements of each area, I'll leave some useful links in the description below this video. Now, another very important point that you have to keep in mind is the different levels of support that you'll be able to get. Now, while all these areas do offer some kind of support or assistance, what you actually get is going to vary greatly depending on where you apply. And depending on your city or your prefecture, you could apply for mentorship programs, co-working spaces, or even grants for your growing business. But as of the time of this recording, all of these things are not available in all of these areas. So once again, make sure you have a look at the links in the description so that you can stay up to date with all the necessary information. Now, another very important thing is that most of these areas that offer the startup visa are also focused on a specific area or sector of the market, such as technology, tourism, green energy, finance, and things like that. So when you come to Japan to create your own business, you have to make sure that you choose an area that's aligned with the goals of your business. Because generally speaking, businesses that are outside of these particular areas are going to have to go over a few more hurdles and obstacles to be able to get approved. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be absolutely impossible to get approved, but just keep in mind that it might be a slightly more uphill battle for you. So just an important point to consider. And on a similar line of thinking, still as of the time of this recording, the startup program is not yet a national initiative. So that means that it's still only being offered in a few select cities and areas in the country. So that might make it more difficult for people like you who are thinking about creating your own business by the seashore or next to Mount Fuji or things like that. Once again, just keep that in mind when you apply. Although, like I mentioned in previous videos, this particularly is something that's going to be changing this year, but I'll be talking about that later in this video as well. Now, if you're really serious about this, about coming to Japan and creating your own business, then you have to know that most of these cities and these areas have a limit on the number of people and the number of startup visas that they can have approved each year. So an early application and a strong proposal is going to be crucial for your approval. So once again, in part 2 of this series, I go over the entire application process and everything you need to know and have in order to maximize your chances of success of getting your startup visa, including how to design and create your ideal business plan. So if you haven't watched it yet, make sure you don't miss it. Now, regarding the nationwide implementation, like I mentioned earlier, this hasn't happened yet. And so that also means that there's no nationwide standardization, which means that basically every city, every area, every prefecture where you can actually apply for your startup visa is going to have a different set of rules, conditions, and regulations for your actual application. So once again, make sure you're up to date with all the information by checking the links in the description. Now, regarding the timeline of things, you have to keep in mind that the startup visa is not going to be a permanent status for you. Remember that it's a temporary transition between being basically no one in this country and becoming a full-blown business owner in Japan. Which means that for the time being, your main objective as you work through the startup program is going to be eventually evolving and transitioning into higher level visas, such as the business manager visa. Now, in addition to all of this, also keep in mind that most of these cities require regular meetings and regular progress reports, just to make sure that everything is going according to plan and that you're still adhering to all the regulations and that you can continue to show the progress and growth of your business. And so given the short time frame, because remember, your startup visa is only going to get approved for either 6 months or 1 year, you have to be on top of things to quickly be able to secure your clients, secure your funding, secure your business premises to show and prove the viability of your business. Now, before we move on to the actual benefits of the startup visa, I just want to remind you that this is something I do to share useful information about life in Japan with people who might find it helpful. And so, if that's you, I really appreciate the support. So make sure you like this video and share it with anyone you can. But now let's move on to the benefits of the startup visa. Now, one of the main benefits you have to keep in mind, and I think it's a point that many people find attractive about this visa, is that when you compare it with the alternative, actually coming to Japan with a business manager visa, you don't have any huge immediate capital requirements. Because as you might know, when you actually apply for your business manager visa, one of the main requirements is having at least 5 million yen in capital. But with the startup visa, you're actually allowed to come to the country and begin operations with much lower funds. But now, let me be clear, when you apply for your startup visa, you still need to show financial proof. And of course, the better your finances are, the better are your chances of getting approved. But the point is that there's no minimum requirement for the amount of money that you should have or the amount of money that you should invest into your business, which might make it a lot more flexible for many of us. Now, another very important benefit is that because of the time that this visa actually gives you, you'll have a lot more time to secure funding, secure investors, crowdfunding, or even apply for government grants without having to make any larger financial commitments, because at this stage you still don't have to worry about registering your company and all those other things that might require some more investments. And on top of that, you'll find that many of these cities where you can actually apply will also offer tons of additional help, including subsidies and grants and shared co-working spaces or living spaces, and even constant guidance and assistance to help keep your costs lower. And many of the cities also offer startup support centers that actually give entrepreneurs the opportunity to interact and network with legal experts, local investors, and even mentors in their own industry. And additionally, many regions also offer discounted accounting services and discounted legal services, and will give you a lot of help when it comes to navigating the laws and the accounting system in Japan as well. Once again, if you'd like more information about this, you'll find it in the links in the description. Now, as an important point, you should also know that all startup visa holders are regularly invited to networking events and seminars that are hosted by the government, which are of course created to incentivize networking and connecting with other businesses in your local area. But now, talking about slightly more serious benefits and things that will actually help you build a solid foundation for your business into the long-term future. One of the most valuable points and benefits of the startup visa in Japan is the fact that once you're able to show the growth and the progress of your business, you'll be able to much more smoothly transition into higher level visas, like for example the business manager visa. And also, once you successfully go through the startup program, you'll be able to build a lot more credibility and a stronger reputation for your business, which will make it a lot easier to transition to those visas, secure loans, and continue building upon the reputation of your business. And ultimately, after you've actually established your successful business in Japan and you've met all the residency requirements, you can eventually qualify to apply for a permanent residence. And remember that unless you have a Japanese spouse or Japanese family or have been living in this country for a very long time, this is actually one of the most reliable ways to become a permanent resident of Japan, creating your own successful business in the country. But of course, not everything is going to be great and fantastic all the time. You're also going to be faced with many challenges and obstacles when you come to Japan to create your own business. So let's have a look at what some of those could actually be. Now, one of the first challenges you might come across is that not only during the application process, but actually during your entire startup journey, you'll have to deal with a lot of paperwork. Because you'll regularly have to submit detailed business plans, progress reports, and even application forms, which have to adhere to the very strict requirements and regulations of Japanese immigration and the Japanese government. And if you most likely have to do all that in Japanese, that's only going to add to your headaches. On top of that, the startup visa process actually involves multiple offices all over the country. There's the immigration offices, the startup support centers, the business registration authorities, the real estate agents, lawyers, translators, and everyone else, actually requiring a lot of coordination between all of the offices and your business. And as you know, even though it's been getting a lot better over the past few years, Japan's bureaucratic system takes a lot of time. And so that actually means you have to plan ahead with a lot of time in order to not miss any deadlines or any approvals or renewals of your visa. And of course, keeping in mind the fact that Japan is an insular country and it's been very much attached to its own way of doing things, some foreign entrepreneurs might find it a bit difficult to navigate the business sector in this country, understanding the way that people deal with each other, the negotiation styles, and so on. So just keep that in mind and remember that whatever might have worked at home for you might not necessarily work the same way here. So even though it might be a challenge, you have to be willing to adapt. And now, while certain areas in Japan will offer English assistance, this is absolutely not the standard. And so you have to be prepared to accept that most of the documents you're going to need for your business and for your registrations and everything else is going to have to be done in Japanese. So if you cannot do it yourself, then you have to get ready to hire the people that can do it for you. And like I mentioned earlier, Japan is likely a very different culture from the culture in your country, and that also includes the business sector. So that means you have to do market research, understand the preferences of your customers in the country, and also learn about the way in which Japanese businesses are actually structured and operated, which can take some time, but remember, you do have support and assistance to help you understand this. Now, regarding the visa specifically, you have to keep in mind that because it's such a short-term visa, remember, it's only a temporary transition between zero and actually being a business owner. During that startup period, you actually have to be able to make quick progress to show the government the viability of your business and your readiness to actually take it to a higher level. Because remember, you will only have 6 months or at most 1 year, or I guess 2 years if you renew the visa again, in order to show to the government the growth and progress of your business. But even with all that in mind, there's always the chance that your visa will just not be renewed or not even approved in the first place. Because even if you have a very solid business idea, if you miss some of the operational or financial benchmarks, you might still get rejected. And so given the risk of having your visa actually denied, you should always have an alternative strategy, such as applying for a different category of visa or even relocating your business to an entirely different area if necessary. But keeping all this in mind, is actually very important that you remember that the startup visa is not meant to be a permanent status. It's actually just a temporary transition between you being basically no one in this country to becoming a full-blown business owner in Japan. And that's exactly what we'll be covering in the next video in this series. Our next step, how to level up from a startup to the business manager visa. So don't miss it, and I'll see you over there.